So in this video, I will talk about adding, subtracting and multiplying complex numbers. Adding and subtracting is pretty easy. You just add the real parts together and add the imaginary parts together. And it's the same deal for subtraction. So I thought I will spend a little bit of time on multiplying. So I have two complex numbers and I want to multiply them. Okay, so the idea is 2 plus 3i and 2 minus i. So what you do is you just FOIL them as usual. So if you FOIL them, you take 2 and 2, which is 4, and then you take 2 and negative I, 2 times negative I, which is negative 2i, and then you go this one, 3 times 2i, 2 times 3i, which is what, 6i, and then finally you have the last piece, which is 3i times negative I. So if you simplify this, you get 4 here, and you have negative 2i plus 6i, which is plus 4i. Then here you have to be a little careful. You have a negative 3, so the 3 and a negative becomes negative 3. And then you have I and I, which is I squared. Now at this point, you should remember that what I is, right? So I we know is square root of negative 1. You think of I as square root of negative 1. I is the square root of negative 1, which means I squared is actually a negative 1. If I is the square root of negative 1, then I squared is negative 1. So what you do is you come up to here, 4 plus 4i, and very carefully you have the negative 3. For I squared, you plug in negative 1. So now you have 4 plus 4i, and you got a negative 3 times negative 1, which is positive 3. And then you will have, if you add the real parts together again, you get 4 plus 3, which is 7, plus the imaginary part is 4i. That's how you multiply complex numbers. You just FOIL, and rather just FOIL the whole thing, right? Now make sure that the last bit especially, you have to be careful. I squared is negative 1, so the negatives here will actually become positive. Okay, so now let's look at an example where we learn how to multiply two complex numbers. Sorry, we did multiplication. We learn how to divide two complex numbers. And actually, so this is the standard form of complex numbers. So our final objective is to leave the answer in the standard form, which is a real part plus some number times I, which is the real part plus the complex part. So we continue our video on complex numbers, and we learn how to multiply two complex numbers, and now we will learn how to divide two complex numbers. So we have two complex numbers, 2 plus 3i, and we divide it by 4 minus 3i. So the first thing to do would be to make sure that the denominator becomes a real number. And the way to do that is we multiply both the top and the bottom by what is known as the conjugate of the denominator. So let's see what do you mean by the conjugate of the denominator. So in this case, if you have 4 minus 3i, how do you get the conjugate? What you do is you keep the real part fixed at 4, but you switch the sign of the imaginary part. So if it is negative 3i, you switch it to what? Positive 3i. So that's the conjugate of 4 minus 3i. So another example, if you have 2 plus 3i, and if you want to get the conjugate, you keep the 2 as it is, but instead of plus 3i, you put minus 3i. Okay, so you keep the real part fixed and you change the sign of the imaginary part. So something very interesting happens when you multiply a complex number with the conjugate. Let's see what happens. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give the reason why we into this whole conjugate thing. Okay, so if you take a complex number 1 plus 2y and if you multiply by its conjugate, say, so that will be 1 is fixed, the real part, and the negative plus becomes plus 2y becomes negative 2y. So what happens now is something very interesting happens. So 1 times 1 is 1. Okay, and then you see that the middle terms, you get a minus 2y from here and you get a plus 2y from here, and you immediately see that this get cancelled off. And the only thing that is left now is to take the last term, which is 2 and negative 2, so plus 2 and negative 2, and then you have I times I, which is I squared. So really you get negative 2 and positive 2 cancels out, you get 1, and then plus 2 times negative 2 is negative 4, and I squared will be negative 1. So 1 minus 4 times negative 1, which becomes positive, so you get really 1 plus 4. So if you really look at it, right, we don't have to do any of this, but you can simply get the answer when you have a number multiplied by the conjugate. How do you get the answer? You square the first term, which is 1, and you square the second term, which is 4. So it's very easy, so the answer is 5. So take another example. If you have 2 plus 3i and say 2 minus 3i, again a number by its conjugate, the answer is very easy. You get 2 squared plus 3 squared, the second term. So the square of this part, square of this part, and that's the answer, which is 4 plus 9, which is 13. So really you don't have to FOIL at all. But now let's get back to our original problem. Okay, so what we had was we had a complex number which we wanted to do, right, and we had to find out how to get that complex number into the standard form. And so 2 plus 3i, a division of complex numbers, and 4 minus 3i. Now what you do is, remember, so that's what we have, right? Okay, 2 plus 3i times 4 minus 3i. What we do is we are going to multiply both the top and the bottom by the conjugate of the bottom. So the conjugate of the bottom will be 4, this is 4 minus 3i, so the conjugate will be 4 plus 3i, and you also multiply the top by 4 plus 3i. Okay, and when we do that, we definitely know what happens to the bottom. The bottom simply becomes the square, because you're multiplying a number by the conjugate, the square of the real, which is what, 4 squared, plus the square of the imaginary, which is what, negative 3 squared. That is what happens to the bottom. Right away we can say, so the bottom actually becomes a real number, because 4 squared plus negative 3 squared will be what, 16 plus 9, which is 25. So it's a real number. So the imaginary part disappears from the bottom, from the denominator. That is why we actually decide to multiply the bottom by the conjugate. But what about the top? Well, top is easy because it's simple filing. So 2 times 4 is 8, and then you get 2 times 3 is 6i, and you have 3i times 4 is 12i, and then you have 3i plus 3i, which is 9i squared. Now watch out, there will be a negative coming from that. So if you simplify that, you get 8 here, and then 6i plus 12i is 18i, and then you have 9i squared. I squared, of course, is negative 1, right? So you get a negative 9. So if you simplify that, you will get 8 minus 9 is negative 1 plus 18i, And at the bottom, notice that because you multiply by the conjugate, you have a very simple real number, 25. So there is no I in the bottom now. It's always a real number. So we are almost done. We need to write this in the standard form. It's negative 1 over 25 plus 18 over 25i. That is the answer. So once again, if you have a complex number, a division of like a fraction complex number, you want to write it in the standard form, right? What you do is you take the denominator and you take the conjugate of that and multiply the top and the bottom by the conjugate. And then you FOIL the top, but the bottom is so easy. It's just the square of the first one plus the square of the second one, negative 3 squared. And because of that, you get a nice real number at the bottom. At the top, when you simplify, you got to be careful that you put the 9i squared as negative 1, and you get negative 1, and then you carefully FOIL the rest, and you should get the answer. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.